Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading to the hospital for a chilling collection of scary stories. Don't forget that if you'd like even more Mort or would like to support me, check out the Patreon link in the description. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mum had gone to the hospital to refill her medication, and while she was waiting near the pharmacy, she decided to use the bathroom down the hall. There's a restroom closer to the actual pharmacy, but that one was packed, so she walked over to use the one near the surgical waiting area instead. It's quieter there, usually just nurses and visitors passing through. She was in the middle of washing her hands when the door opened and an older woman came in, slowly maneuvering a walker. The woman headed straight for one of the larger, handicapped stalls. A few seconds later, a younger woman followed her inside the bathroom and went into the same stall. It struck my mum as a little strange. People don't usually double up unless someone needs help, but she figured the younger woman was a caretaker or a family member assisting her. A minute or two passed, and the younger woman comes back out of the stall, walked right out of the bathroom, and swung the door shut behind her. My mum waited for the older woman to come out next, but she didn't. There was no sound, no movement, no walker shifting. Another woman standing at the sink glanced at the stall, then back at my mum, both of them silently acknowledging just how weird the whole thing felt. Finally, the other woman stepped forward, pushed the stall door open, and immediately looked confused. The stall was completely empty. There was no older woman, no walker, no anything. My mum went over and checked for herself. The handicap stall was bare. No sign anyone had been in it at all. The two of them just stared at each other, trying to make sense of it. And here's the part that blows my mind. It wasn't just a person disappearing, it was the walker too. A big, metal, physical object that can't exactly slip under a door or vanish behind someone quietly. If my mum had only seen the older woman, she may have second-guessed herself. But the walker? That should have been impossible to ignore. Broad daylight, a busy hospital. No weird lighting, no shadows, no tricks of the eye, and two people witnessing it, not just one. We've talked about it so many times trying to process what happened, and there's still no explanation that doesn't dip into the paranormal. I'm honestly curious if anyone else has experienced anything like it, because this one still sits in the back of my mind. A few years back, I was working for an underground utility company on a big nature park project. The idea behind the park was actually pretty cool. All the reclaimed treated water from the sewage plant would be pumped into nearby swamps that had dried out over the years. The swamps would finish naturally filtering the water and in the process create a new habitat. To make it happen, we had to build new lift stations, huge underground concrete tanks that collected the treated water before it was pushed out to the wetlands. One day, I was down in the first lift station, sealing the storage tank and testing it for leaks. It was pretty much impossible to avoid getting splashed, and the water, while clean enough for a swamp, definitely wasn't meant for people. I got hit with a good amount. And a few days later, I was, to the surprise of exactly no one, miserably sick. I went to a local hospital, which is generous to call it a hospital. It's old, tiny, and mostly functions as a boo-boo stop, cuts, sprains, and minor infections. But anything serious, they'll ship you to a real hospital 2 towns over. Our last census was 590 people. So you get the idea. My wife and I were put in one of the ER rooms. They hooked me up to fluids and antibiotics. It was a 2-bed room separated by a curtain. They keep the lights dim because they just brought in a woman suffering from a severe migraine. A few minutes later, staff came and took her for some sort of scan. I was laying in the bed closest to her side of the room, clutching my stomach because whatever I'd caught was tearing me up inside. My wife was sitting right next to me, trying to keep me calm. The ER was dead quiet, just us, some nurses at the desk, and maybe 3 or 4 other patients total. It was nothing out of the ordinary. Then out of nowhere, we both heard a woman's voice from behind the curtain, raspy and strained. "Oh God, help me." My wife and I both whipped our heads towards the curtain at the exact same moment. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need the nurse?" My wife leaned in a little closer and whispered, "Didn't they just take her out of there like 10 minutes ago?" We sat there stiff and silent watching the curtain. Then we heard it again. "Please, someone help me, save me." But this time the curtain actually moved, like someone was moving it. My wife, who is a whole lot braver than me while I'm half dead in a hospital bed, jumped up and hurried over. She grabbed the edge of the curtain and ripped it open. But there was no one to help. Absolutely no one behind it. No patient, no walker. It was just an empty bed in a dim room. She turned to me with this look and said, "We need to leave now." I smashed the call button and our nurse, who we knew personally because everyone knows everyone, came in. We explained exactly what happened. She listened, nodded once, and then said in the calmest, most casual voice, "Yeah, that happens sometimes. I'm sorry." Just like that, as if it were normal. Then, completely unfazed, she added, "Well, at least you're not here at night. That's when the kids we see and hear come out to play." Kids. Plural. I swear my blood pressure dropped harder than my fever. Sick or not, I wanted to leave. It was hands down the creepiest day I've ever had in hospital, and I've never moved so fast after being pumped full of antibiotics in my life. When I was around 6 years old, I got sick. Not hospital level sick, but was running a high fever. That night my fever peaked. I remember going to bed feeling absolutely miserable. My mum had given me a mix of medication, and shortly after I started to drift off. At some point in the night I woke up suddenly. My room was dark, with just the faint orange glow of a streetlight leaking through the blinds. But in one corner everything looked wrong. There was what looked like a hospital check-in desk sitting in the middle of my room, glowing softly, like it didn't belong in the same world as the rest of the surroundings. 2 receptionists stood behind the desk, and a woman stood in front of it with her back to me. I just remember staring completely confused. I was 6, feverish, and trying to understand why my bedroom had turned into a dimly lit hospital lobby. The woman turned around. She walked towards my bed and sat down on the edge, close enough that I could feel the mattress shift. She was wearing a black bandana and a black leather jacket, what I could only describe at the time as a biker jacket. She looked at me with this very warm, calm smile and told me very simply, "Everything's going to be okay." And then she stood up, walked away, and the entire scene faded like someone switching off a projection. My dark room snapped back into place. I was terrified and confused, so I went straight to my mum's room and woke her up and told her everything and described the woman as best I could. As I talked, she got this strange, stunned look on her face. When I finished, she said it sounded exactly like her best friend Kay, a woman who had died just hours before I was born. Kay had lost her hair from chemo and always wore a black bandana. Her favorite piece of clothing was a black biker jacket, and according to my mum, she had been so excited to meet me, but never got the chance. I'm 32 now, and I still think about that night. Whenever I tell the story, people sometimes act like they don't fully believe me, which I understand. It sounds strange, and I've questioned myself too. Maybe it was the fever. Maybe my brain stitched together random pieces of information I shouldn't have had access to. but being able to describe a woman I'd never met, who died before I was even born, that's the part I can't explain. And I wonder what you guys will think. A few years back, I was working on an inpatient hospice unit. Most of our patients came in to get a symptom under control, and then they went back home to die, surrounded by family. But every so often, we'd get someone who stayed until the end. These were people with excellent insurance, or old union guys whose plans covered long-term inpatient hospice care. After a while in this field, you collect more than a few unsettling stories. But this one stayed with me. One of our long-term patients was called Joe. He was an old auto factory worker. He'd built a lot of muscle and breathed in a lot of cigarette smoke during his lifetime. He was a straight shooter. If he liked you, you knew it. If he didn't, you knew it too. I ended up with the nickname Smitty, which wasn't exactly original, but coming from Joe, it felt a bit special. He was dying of pancreatic cancer, but unlike most people with that diagnosis, he wasn't in a lot of pain. He never married, never had kids, and insisted he wasn't about to die in his old house. He said he didn't want to mess up with the resale value. His nieces tried to convince him to come home so he wouldn't be alone, but Joe wanted what he considered dignity in his own room and his own routine, and staff which he wasn't embarrassed to ask help from. I worked my arse off on that line for 35 years. Damn well can enjoy the benefits now, he'd say. He settled into the unit like it was a retirement cabin. Whenever I came to pass meds or check vitals, he'd have a new joke, a story about the factory, or an invitation to sit and play cards. Hospice allows comfort items, so yes, the man got his nightly shot of whiskey if he asked for it. His laugh was deep and gravelly, and always ended in a cough. And sometimes after my rounds, I'd spend my break in his room, listening to him talk like we were two old men on the porch. But for all his humour, Joe was a straightforward, clear-headed guy. He didn't have the waxing and waning mental status a lot of patients get. No agitation, confusion, or hallucinations either, and was sharp until the very end. One day, I came in for my shift, grabbed my report sheet and started making rounds. When I walked into Joe's room, I expected the usual wisecrack. Instead, he just stared at me with this strange, confused expression, studying me like something wasn't adding up. I asked if he was okay, and he brushed me off with a quick, "Yeah," before going back to his newspaper. But that wasn't like him. But I let it go. Except it kept happening. Every time I stepped into his room, he'd give me that look, like he was trying to reconcile what he was seeing and kept coming up short. After half my shift, I finally asked what was wrong, and he said something I've remembered for the rest of my life. "Yes, Smitty, everything's fine, but I'm not sure about the guy who's been following you around all day." I felt my stomach drop. I asked him what he meant. "That tall guy in black. He's been right beside you all day." There were only 2 men on the entire unit that day, and I was one of them. He wasn't confusing me with anyone, and no one had been anywhere near me all shift. Against my better judgment, I asked if the man was with me now, and Joe didn't hesitate. "Oh yeah, Smitty, and he don't look too happy." He wasn't panicking. He wasn't confused. He wasn't acting like a man in pain or delirium. Just looking at something I couldn't see. My nursing brain told me not to feed the hallucination, but this didn't fit any pattern I'd ever seen. I left the room as casually as I could manage heart hammering. I'm not a supernatural believer. I wasn't then either. But I can't explain the cold that settled into my spine after that conversation. For the rest of the shift, I avoided Joe more than I should have, and I regret that. Because a few hours after I left, the night nurse called. Joe had passed. When I returned to the unit, I arrived at the same time as Joe's niece was stepping out of his room. Her eyes were red, not from sadness, more like anger. I told her I was sorry for her loss, and she said the usual line that he's in a better place. She ripped around and glared at me. He was a drunk asshole who beat his pregnant girlfriend until she miscarried. If he's anywhere, it ain't better than here. Then she walked off. I had known Joe for months. He'd never once talked about his past beyond the factory. I didn't know what to say. I finally went into his room to say goodbye. The staff had already washed him and arranged him neatly on the bed, with the blanket tucked around him. The lights were dim, the blinds half drawn. People almost always die with their eyes closed, but his eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression I can only describe as real fear. And standing there looking at him, all I could think about was the man Joe swore had been following me around all day, the one standing beside me the last time Joe ever saw anything at all. I had something happen to me recently while staying in the hospital overnight with my dad. He had a heart attack on September 1st and had been in the ICU for an extended period of time. This particular experience was when he finally was out of the ICU last week into a non-ICU step-down room. The hospital has a weird energy to it, and my dad actually died 6 times and came back at the beginning of his stay. That's a story with a lot of depth too, and I can promise you there is something waiting for us all on the other side. My stepmother and I had been taking turns sleeping at the hospital while he recovers, which isn't the most comfortable experience. One night last week, I'm staying with my dad. I had what at first I thought was a dream. I was lying flat, on my back next to my dad's bed in one of the rooms, where he actually died one of those times. I'm looking at the door, and out of nowhere this tall, slender, stringy shadow figure appears at the doorway. It's very tall, almost Slender Man looking in a way, just a shadow being of sorts. I remember distinctly thinking it was a djinn when I first saw it. I don't know why. But what terrified me was its face. It was like my little sister's face, sort of projected onto this thing's face, like a face hologram that was working 95% correctly. It's so hard to describe, but it was like nothing I've ever seen or felt before. Usually, if something is just a dream, I'm easily able to wake myself up. I never have any doubt that I've just had normal dreams. This was different. I felt raw, unfettered terror. In this dream, the shadow was levitating slowly and deliberately towards me, to the side of my bed where I was laying, still crudely wearing my sister's face. I then hear my dad call out to me, "I'm sorry this is happening to you. Don't worry, it's just an angel. Be not afraid." But every fiber of my being screamed to me that this was not an angel, and I watched as it came to hover right over me, looking down at me intently. As it got closer, as I felt increasingly terrified, I rebuked it in the name of Jesus. I squeaked those words out through the overwhelming terror I was feeling. I was unable to move, barely able to speak but those few words. I'm not religious in a practical sense, but that's all I could think of at that moment. This is the weirdest part. My sister's facial mimicry dissolved at this moment. I could now see its real face, which was sort of like a bunch of black shadowy lines coming to a central point in a void, all pulsating intricately. Tiny, white, beady eyes. And it looked at that moment disappointed, saddened I called upon the Lord. After that momentary disappointed hesitation, the shadow enveloped me as I tried to scream or move, none of which I could do. I got the feeling of being in a void that was enveloping me. And then it ended. I woke in the same lying position as in the dream, But here's the strangest part. I don't remember waking up. Any dream I've ever had, there is a distinct "oh crap" moment followed by waking up, usually alarmed or heart racing or panic as if it were a bad dream. But that's why I keep calling it a dream, because I just came to, eerily calm, staring at the back of the couch I was sleeping on. Like I was just dropped back into reality. I didn't wake up, I just became aware. There was no defined moment of waking up, and this felt more real than any dream I've ever had. I'm rather confident I was visited or tested by something with its energy attached to the hospital, and I don't think it was benevolent. I've never experienced anything like this before, and I'm wondering if anyone has ever had a dream in a strange setting that didn't feel like a normal dream. Anyone with similar hospital experiences here? Because I know what a dream feels like, and I know what this felt like, and I don't think it was a dream. I don't know what the hell it was, though. I was barely a month into my sophomore year of college, and had turned 19, when everything went sideways. I'd been sick for days, a deep, bone-tired illness that didn't match the strep throat diagnosis the campus health center threw at me. I didn't even have a sore throat. By the time I finally asked a friend to drive me to the ER, I felt like my body was shutting down one piece at a time. The hospital wasn't large, but the moment I stepped through the automatic doors, the staff at the hospital could tell something wasn't right. They moved quickly, ushering me past the waiting room into a dim, cool exam area, and I was admitted almost instantly with a severe kidney infection. Later, reading my medical records, I learned they were worried I was having a heart attack. My blood pressure and heart rate were dangerously high. At the time, all I knew was pain. A deep, pulsing, relentless kind that wrapped around my lower back and radiated through my ribs like a tightening belt. They'd given me one shot of Toradol around 10 in the morning. That was it. No other relief, no doctor checking in, no updates. The hours dragged. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. The hallway outside my door echoed with rolling carts and distant pages, and I lay there, watching the IV drip slowly drain into my arm, while the pain gnawed at me. By 7 that evening, I felt like my world had shrunk to the hospital bed and the chair beside it, where my friend sat trying to keep me talking. The room itself was quiet, and that's when it happened. At the foot of my bed, a silhouette blurred into being, and before my brain could catch up on what I was seeing, the features sharpened. A woman was standing there. It was my nonny, my mother's mother, who had died when I was 5. She looked exactly as I had remembered her, soft face, warm expression, and the familiar blue muumuu she practically lived in. She had dozens of these dresses in every color, but somehow the blue one felt like the one most like her. She didn't speak or move, simply stood there, at the edge of her form almost glowing in the low light. For a split second, all the stories I'd heard over the years came back to the forefront of my mind. The ones about nurses saying patients sometimes see dead loved ones right before they die, that they come to guide you across, and I stared wide-eyed, terrified but comforted all at once. And then, just as gently as she appeared, she faded, dissolved into the space around her, and was gone. "Did you just see someone standing there?" I whispered to my friend, and she gave me a strange look. No, there was no one there. Maybe it was the pain. Maybe it was fever, or exhaustion, or my body struggling not to give out. That was the logical part of me tried to argue. But something deep in my chest knew it wasn't just a hallucination. The second piece of proof walked into my room hours later. It was around 10 at night when the specialists finally showed up. I was exhausted, half dazed from the pain when the door swung open and I froze. The man who stepped inside looked exactly like my pop-up, my nonny's husband. He had died when I was 3. But I knew his face from the photos, from the stories, and the way my mum's voice softened when she spoke of him. Seeing him, or someone who could have been his twin after seeing Nonny earlier, sent shivers through me that had nothing to do with the infection. The next day when my mum arrived, she met the doctor, and I watched her expression crumble. "He looks just like my father," she whispered. Over the next few days, as I failed to respond to antibiotics and the infection worsened before it got better, the staff admitted they were worried that I wouldn't make it. Nurses told me they'd pray for me. Even the custodian who cleaned my room said she asked God to help me because she could tell how miserable I was from just looking at me. And through all of it, I kept thinking of that moment in the dim hospital room. I'd been terrified in pain, far from home, convinced something bad was about to happen. When I was little and got sick, my nonny was the one who made me soup, the one I wanted near me. It made sense in a quiet way that she would show up when I needed comfort the most. Whether it was something supernatural, or my mind reaching for what I needed to pull through it, I don't know. But deep down, I believe it was really her. I think she came to reassure me and to stand with me during the worst night of my life. I've worked in healthcare long enough to see some strange things. If you stay in hospitals after dark long enough, you'll learn there are moments that make you question everything you think about your life, and about what might come after it. This particular story wasn't mine originally, but it's one I'll never forget. It was told to me during a slow night shift when I was working as a surgical tech in labor and delivery. If you've ever worked nights in a hospital, you know how it goes. Once the hustle and bustle dies down and the patients are stable, people tend to gather at the nurses' station with coffee and just chatting. Usually it's stuff like funny patient quotes or horror stories from med school, but that night, one story kept us all quiet. Donna was our charge nurse. She'd only been in labor and delivery for about a year, but she was a veteran nurse with over 2 decades in ICU before she transferred. She was pragmatic and steady, and never tried to impress or exaggerate anything, and so when she spoke, you listened. She said it happened late one afternoon when she was still working ICU. She'd been making rounds, checking vitals, fluffing pillows, that sort of thing. Her patient was an older man, about late 70s, admitted for heart failure. He'd been stable that morning but was growing weaker throughout the day. When she came in to check on him, he was propped up against the pillows, watching something in the far corner of the room. Then I asked him how he was feeling. He didn't look at her. He just smiled faintly and said, "Do you see those butterflies over there? Aren't they beautiful?" Now in medicine, there's a saying, don't fight the crazy. That might sound harsh, but anyone who's worked around confusion or delirium knows what it means. If someone with dementia says there's a parade going past their door, you wave and agree. There's no point arguing with them as it only makes them anxious. So Donna smiled and said, "They sure are." She went on checking his IVs and adjusting the monitor leads. A moment later the man said it again, a little louder this time. "They're getting closer, look." Donna glanced towards the corner, saw nothing but shadows from the blinds, and said gently, "Ah, yes, they're lovely." She assumed it was some kind of visual hallucination, maybe from a side effect from medication or lack of oxygen. But when the man's face lit up, his whole expression changed. His eyes, she said, she'd never forget how suddenly they were clear and bright. He reached a trembling hand towards the air and whispered, "Do you see them? They're so beautiful, so bright." Donna said his voice had a calmness that didn't match the usual confusion she saw in dying patients, and it wasn't fear, it was awe. Then he pushed himself upright, suddenly as if filled with new strength, and said as clearly as you and I could, "Oh, they're not butterflies. They're angels, and they're here for me. He smiled one last time, laid back against the bed, and died. Flatline. The alarms went off, the code team rushed in, and Donna jumped into action, started compressions and calling for epinephrine. For 20 minutes they worked that man, intubated him, shocked him, everything, but he was gone. When they finally stopped, the room was silent, except for the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator shutting down. Donna said she stood there, gloves still on, staring at his face. The expression he died with was peaceful, like someone who'd seen something beautiful right before leaving. She told us the story with the same calm tone she used for everything else. No dramatics or shaky voice, just the facts. But she ended it by saying this: "If I hadn't been there to see it, I wouldn't have believed it. I was an atheist before that day. Not anymore." No one spoke after that. The nurses who had been scrolling their phones put them down, and someone poured more coffee but didn't drink it. I'm not trying to preach or convert anyone. I've seen enough death to know that belief is personal, and it's not something you can force. But that story changed me. It made me wonder what our patients see in those final moments, the ones who reach out towards the corners of the room. We write it off as hypoxia or medication, but what if it isn't? I've been in rooms since then where patients pass peacefully, smiling at something above their beds, whispering names we can't understand. And every time it happens, I think about Donna's patient, the one who mistook angels for butterflies. And I always wonder what exactly he saw coming for him that day. I used to work transport in a hospital for a few years, and our home base was in the basement, the same level where they did all the laundry and sorted a ton of supplies, even on a normal day. It wasn't exactly a cozy place to hang out, but after this one night, I hated working down there even more. That night I was the only person in the basement. It was dead quiet, with just the low hum of the industrial washes in the distance. Out of nowhere, I heard someone whistling at the end of the hallway near the elevator, clear as day, like someone just casually walking around. I leaned around the corner, expecting to see my only co-worker on duty. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty all the way down. I brushed it off. Nights are slow, and I'm not the kind to get freaked out easily. I went back to the break room, had some snacks, and just killed time. And a few minutes later, I heard a loud bang from the hallway. I got up to check, and there was a hospital bed rolling down the hall by itself, bumping into the walls. At this point, I figured my co-worker was messing with me, so I radioed him. He immediately answered and said he was up in the cafeteria, but I didn't buy it. I was convinced he was hiding somewhere, waiting for me to catch him off guard. I walked past the laundry room, and just as I passed it, the machines suddenly roared to life. Loud, heavy cycles, like someone turned them all on at once. I stuck my head inside, expecting to find him crouched behind a cart or something. But there was nothing. It was completely empty. That's when the nervous feeling started creeping in. I stepped into the laundry room to get a better look, and the machines instantly shut off, every single one of them dead silent. I froze, then bolted out of there and headed for the elevator. As I waited for it to come down, the whistling started again. The same tune, the same distance away. It was the same casual tone too, except I knew without a doubt I was the only worker in the basement. While I stood there trying to keep my breathing steady, I saw boxes at the far end of the hallway start falling off the shelves, not all at once, but one by one. Gloves, tissues, medical tubes, like someone was running their hand along the shelves, knocking them off deliberately. I could feel every hair on my body stand straight, goosebumps everywhere, that heavy, sick feeling in your gut when you realize you're being watched. Just as the elevator doors open, I swear I felt someone lightly brush past my arm. Not hard, more like someone walking behind me and grazing me on their way by. That was it. I went straight upstairs and found my co-worker exactly where he said he was, sitting in the cafeteria. I told him everything, shaking like an idiot. I transferred out of that department not too long after. And here's the part that still creeps me out. I whistle to myself all the time at work. I do it without thinking. So whatever was down there, I feel like it was mimicking me. After I transferred to the operating room, things didn't exactly get less weird. I was part of an emergency C-section where the baby didn't make it, and for months afterwards, my co-worker and I would occasionally hear a baby crying in the hallway late at night, when no babies were ever on that floor. Security said they'd seen things too, but that's a whole other story. I'm a doctor. This happened to me during my intern year around 2017. I was assigned to a hospital in a mid-sized city. Nothing huge, but big enough to have multiple specialty departments and a decent trauma unit. That night I was covering the labor and delivery ward on the 4th floor. It was a slow and quiet night shift, maybe 2 patients in active labor and a couple of postpartums and not much else going on. Around 2 a.m. I got a call from one of the nurses on the 5th floor, which was the Department of Pathology of Pregnancy. Basically, where they admitted complicated cases, preeclampsia, fetal deaths, miscarriages, that sort of thing. She told me one of the patients was scheduled for procedure around 7 a.m. and needed new labs drawn, ideally around 4 or 5 in the morning. Since I had nothing pressing at the moment, I figured it'd be efficient to go and draw them early, before any emergencies cropped up. I decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator, something I'd done a dozen times before without thinking. But that night, I climbed towards the 5th floor landing and something felt off. Not in a haunted movie kind of way, just physically wrong. Now, hospitals are sterile and smell faintly of cleaning products and metal, but here it smelled different. It reeked of something organic and rotten. I remember holding the railing as I turned the last few steps up. My head was angled downward since I was looking at the chart I'd brought, but when I lifted my gaze, I froze. Right at the top of the landing, maybe 5 or 6 feet above me, I saw what looked like the lower half of a child standing there, greyish skin that didn't look remotely alive and bare feet. It's the kind of grey that you'll see in a cadaver, that dull, waxy tone that doesn't belong on any living person. The hospital gown it was wearing hung stiffly, like it had been soaked and dried badly. I could see every vein, black and dark under the skin. I couldn't move. I couldn't even look all the way up. My brain refused to register it as something that should exist. Then a wave of stench hit me. This awful, putrid smell, like old blood and something decomposing. I stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over the steps, and bolted down the stairs without looking back. When I burst back into the L&D ward, one of the security guards near the nurses' station looked at me and said, without a word, you saw something too, didn't you?" He said it casually, like this wasn't the first time someone had come running back pale and shaken. I told him what I'd seen, or at least what I thought I saw, and he just nodded. Then he told me in that calm, matter-of-fact way older hospital staff sometimes have that the child wasn't the only thing people had seen in the upper floors. He told me some night nurses would hear footsteps or catch glimpses of someone walking down the hallway towards a closed ward, and when they'd go check, there'd be no one there. When I finally went back at 5 a.m. to draw the labs, I forced myself to take the elevator. I couldn't even look at the stairway again. The nurse up there didn't seem surprised to see me late. She just said, "Good, it's better you waited until morning." I never found out exactly what the guard or nurse had seen, but I didn't need to. I learnt my lesson. In hospitals, especially the older ones, stick to your schedule and avoid the stairwells at night. I was 5 years old when this happened. We had just moved onto the airbase where my dad worked security forces. Since I was too young to go to the youth center, some days he'd bring me along to his office. The base itself had a strange mix of new construction and history. It used to be an army fort from the railroad era, and a lot of the old brick buildings were still standing. Many had been converted into offices or housing over the years. Even the old hospital buildings were now office space. It was a long rectangular structure with wide stone steps and heavy doors, and they were close to my bus stop. To get to my dad's building, you had to pass the base cemetery, rows of worn headstones behind an iron fence. But that's a whole different story. Dad's office was on the 3rd floor of one of these old hospital buildings. I remember the hallway being long and echoey. His office overlooked a parking lot shaded by huge old trees, their branches hanging low, like they were trying to block out the sun. Because everything on base was secured, I couldn't go anywhere alone. The elevators had keypads too high for me to reach, and the stairwell doors were all locked from the outside. So when I tagged along, I stayed glued to my dad or inside his office. My uncle and dad would sometimes talk about strange things happening in that building. Late night footsteps, voices, lights flickering on after they'd locked up. But I was a kid, and ghosts were something from cartoons. One afternoon, Dad needed to drop off a file at another office in the building, just one floor down in the opposite end of the hallway. He told me he'd only be gone a minute, but I wasn't worried. I had my book, my stuffed wolf, and a snack. Before he left, he told me he'd keep the door slightly open so that I could reach the water fountain just outside if I needed it. I remember nodding, already absorbed in my book. I heard him walk down the hall, his boots making sharp, confident thumps. Then the keypad beeping, followed by the door slamming shut behind him. Everything went quiet again. I was flipping through my book when I heard the footsteps in the hall, but they weren't like Dad's. Whoever was moving walked slower and unhurried. They grew closer, and then a man appeared leaning his head around the office doorframe. His uniform immediately threw me off. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen on base, not the modern Air Force blue or camouflage. It looked different, like a history book picture. I couldn't tell you the exact details now, only that it didn't fit in. The guy smiled at me, tipped his hat like we were in an old movie, and said, "Good afternoon, little lady." 5-year-old me waved at him. He chuckled and kept walking down the hallway. I waited for the sound of the downstairs office door unlocking and slamming shut. The same sound I'd heard when Dad left, but it never came. The footsteps just stopped in the middle of the hallway. I remember listening for a long time, thinking maybe he just turned into another office. But there were no beeps, or any doors opening. In fact, there was no sound at all. I went back to my book, not thinking much of it. It wasn't until weeks later during some random conversation with my mum that I mentioned the man in the old uniform. She stopped what she was doing and looked at me strangely and asked me to describe him. And that's when the reality clicked in for me, that I had seen something that no one else should have been able to. I never stepped foot inside the brick building again, and do not plan to. I've been working as a cleaner at a small 3-story non-inpatient hospital for about 5 months now. My job is to take care of all the common areas, waiting room, hallway, office spaces, and bathrooms. I've got a few co-workers who handle other parts of the building like urgent care, pediatrics, and the surgical center. But since we all work different sections, I rarely see them during my shift. Last month, something happened that I still can't make sense of. It was a normal evening. I had just started my route on the 1st floor, beginning with the bathrooms. The layout there is simple. 2 restrooms facing a hallway, a waiting area to the left, and a cluster of administrative offices to the right. Everything was silent except for the hum of the air vents and the squeak of my cleaning cart wheels on the tile. I had just finished up the 1st bathroom and was about to head to the 2nd when something caught my eye. Out of the corner of my vision, by the office hallway, I saw someone peeking around the corner. A young woman in maybe her mid-20s, just barely visible from the shoulders up. She had this long, dark hair and pale skin that almost glowed under the fluorescent lights. For a split second, I thought she was one of my co-workers messing around, but when I turned my head to look properly, she was gone. It was weird because that hallway ends in a locked door to administration. No one's supposed to be there after 7 p.m, and this was well past that. Plus the way she looked. I don't even know how to describe it right. Her face looked human but not quite, like a picture that had been filtered too much. Uncanny. My stomach dropped when I realized she'd been standing against a completely white wall, with no shadows, no reflections, nothing that could have tricked my eyes. I tried to brush it off, and just kept working. Now hospitals are stressful places, lots of strange noises and odd reflections late at night. About 10 minutes later, I was in one of those waiting areas, bent over replacing a trash bag. My back was to the room facing the wall, when out of nowhere, I felt someone grab the back of my shirt. Not a light tug, but a solid pull, like someone had pinched the fabric between the fingers and lifted it a few inches off my back before letting it drop. I froze. The shirt fell back against my skin, and I swear I could feel my whole body turn cold. I spun around expecting to see one of my co-workers laughing, or maybe a patient who'd wandered out of the room. But there was no one there. The hallway behind me was completely empty. Without really thinking, I blurted out, "I didn't say you could touch me." My voice echoed down the hallway, and that was somehow worse. It was like I was the only living thing making a noise in this entire wing. I rushed through the rest of my route, barely looking around, and clocked out early that night. I didn't tell anyone about it at first because I knew exactly how it would sound. I got touched by a ghost at work, but I know what I felt. My shirt was physically lifted and there was no one near me. I still clean that same floor, but I move a lot faster when I'm there now, and I haven't seen the woman again or felt anyone touch me. But I can't shake the feeling that something in that building was watching me that night. Last week, my mum was transferred to the cardiac wing of one of the oldest hospitals in our area. She'd had a mild heart attack, but the real issue was her blood pressure. It kept spiking no matter what they gave her. At one point, it hit 195 over 115, before the cocktail of meds finally started to bring it under control. When I arrived to stay the night with her, she wasn't in a private room. Her roommate was finishing up physical therapy behind the curtain when the head nurse came in to go over my mum's charts and sort out dinner, since the cafeteria had already closed. While the nurse was listing off meal options, I suddenly heard a clear, desperate, "Help me," from the right. I snapped my head towards the sound. It came from behind the neighbor's curtain, exactly where I assumed she was still being worked on. It wasn't muffled or distant. It was spoken like someone sitting right there in the room. A few moments passed, then I heard it again. "Help me." Same voice with the same urgent tone. I got the nurse's attention and said, "The patient's asking for help," and I pointed towards the curtain. She walked over immediately. I could hear her checking in with the neighbor, asking if she'd called out or needed anything. The woman said she was completely fine and had not called for help. Her voice sounded totally normal, not distressed at all. The nurse came back to my mum's bedside with this small, knowing smile. She rested a hand on my shoulder and said, almost playfully but not joking, "You better get used to that around here." Then she gave me a wink before going back to charting. That was the moment it hit me. She wasn't trying to reassure me. She was letting me know that this wasn't unusual for that floor. And since I'm already a believer, I took her seriously. I stayed alert the rest of the night, half expecting more voices or someone whispering near the curtain. Thankfully, it was the only experience I had. Even without the paranormal, trying to sleep in a hospital is hard enough. This happened a few years ago, when I was visiting my dad in the hospital. He'd been admitted for a while, so I'd gotten used to this routine, spending hours by his bed, grabbing coffee from the cafeteria, taking breaks to stretch my legs, that sort of thing. It was around 3 p.m, well after the lunch rush, and the cafeteria was nearly empty. I decided to pop into the toilets next to the cafe before heading back upstairs. They were in one of the older wings in the hospital, which still had yellow-tiled and fluorescent flickering tube lights. When I stepped inside, I got this feeling like no one had been in there for a while. There were only 2 stools and I took the middle one. I remember thinking how quiet it was. I couldn't hear the distant chatter outside the doors being closed, and there was no one in here with me. I was sure of that. Halfway through doing my business, I suddenly heard a click. A split second later, I was plunged into complete darkness. No dim glow from under the door, no emergency light, just pitch darkness. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't see a thing. At first, I froze, waiting for the lights to flicker back on, but they didn't. My brain immediately started rationalizing. Okay, motion sensor lights. Maybe the timer ran out. Stay calm. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't heard the hum of the motion sensor clicking off. It sounded like a physical switch. Panic started to set in. I was fumbling for toilet paper, yanking up my pants and trying to unlock the stall door all at once. My heart was pounding. The darkness felt so thick it was almost suffocating, and I could hear myself breathing way too fast. When I finally got the lock open, I half stumbled out, running my hands along the wall like a blind person, trying to find the sink or a light source. My fingers brushed cold tile and metal fixtures, but nothing familiar. It felt like I'd been moving in the bathroom for ages, when in reality it had probably only been moments. Then my hand hit the heavy door handle. I yanked it open, and the hallway light spilled in, washing over everything. And that's when I saw it. The light switch was right there, on the wall by the door, a normal old-style plastic switch, and it was flipped off. There was no timer, no motion sensor. Someone or something had physically turned it off while I was sitting in that stool. I stood there for a long second staring at it. My skin was crawling. I knew no one had come in. Those doors are loud, and I'd have heard it open or close, but it was completely switched off. To this day, I can't explain it. Maybe it was an electrical issue, but the fact the switch had clicked and physically changed positions makes that hard to believe. Ever since that day, I've had this weird anxiety about public restrooms. I always make sure I know where the light switch is before I lock the door. I laugh about it now, but honestly in that moment it felt like something was in there with me, messing with the only person inside. I really hope it never happens again. I worked through the lockdown at a local hospital here in Southmere. It was a strange and stressful time, but amid all the chaos, I began to hear stories. Things passed between staff in break rooms or at the end of shifts. And after a while I stopped ignoring them, because they started to line up. It started with something simple. I once commented to a few colleagues how eerie a particular corridor felt during night shift. It wasn't anything dramatic, just how you feel strange sometimes when you walk it alone. Both of them exchanged a look and told me almost casually that I wasn't the only one who thought so. They said staff sometimes see a little girl running through that corridor, past them, from one room to the other, that she was always alone and always just out of reach. Naturally, they'll have to go check, but every time the doors are locked and there's no sign of anyone, and no possible way a child could have entered the area, let alone vanish from it. Then there was a different story. In a secure part of the building, 3 staff were standing around talking about a task, and someone cracked a light joke, and then clear as day they heard a child laugh right there with them. But there were no children or patients on that floor, no open doors. They looked around and they were the only ones in the area. They weren't scared though. They said it felt oddly sweet, like the laughter was happy to be included. But not all stories are like that. Another colleague told me about an incident at a different hospital nearby. A patient cleared to move around a little for health reasons got lost and wandered into a wing that had just been deep cleaned and sealed off. He eventually returned to his unit, and the nurses, rightfully concerned, asked how he found his way back. He said a nurse helped him. She was lovely, just guided him right out. I didn't know some of you still wore those old-fashioned caps, he added with a smile. No one at the hospital has worn a traditional nurse's cap in over 45 years. I still work in healthcare, and still hear the occasional story from the night shift, and not all of them are scary. Some are comforting. But it certainly reminds you that there can be times that people leave impressions behind. I suppose it's more common in places where life and death are so close together. I was brand new at the hospital. My second grave shift. Training takes place in the daytime for 1 week, and then you get transferred to do nights if that's your schedule. This was 4 years ago. There are 2 other officers with me. Eric, who was in his second week of employment, and Jay, edgelord as he's self-titled. Eric was pretty happy-go-lucky, give me a reason to put my hands on you kind of guy. And Jay was very tall, very serious looking with a deep voice, and had a dark sense of humor, but who was a really fun guy to be around. On this night, in the wee hours of the morning, somewhere between midnight and 4 a.m., Eric was patrolling the parking garage, and Jay was with me in the historic building. He insisted it be him who goes with me and not Eric. I think it's because I'm the only female security officer, and the guys have taken a big brother approach to me. Now, before the current hospital's owners, we were ordered by a different company that's now bankrupt, and they had more lax policies and rules. Maintenance would often take up folding chairs / self-brought camping chairs to the roof of the historic building and hang out. It's out of sight of the grounds, and there's a good 4-foot wall surrounding the roof. I say this because they often forgot to lock the roof access door when they were done. Anyway, Jay was clearing the roof as maintenance had yet again forgotten to lock the door. And while Jay was doing that, I was patrolling the infamous 5th floor, twisting doorknobs as I walked to ensure they were all locked. I was nearing the end of the hallway where the windows looked out over the top level of the parking structure, when I heard footsteps behind me running, almost at inhuman speed. I turned around, almost knocking my shoulder mic off my shirt, but saw no one behind me. I jump on my radio, initiating a position request to both Jay and Eric, thinking they were playing a prank on me. Jay replies he's still on the roof, and Eric states he's coming up to the top level of the parking garage. I look out the window, and yep, there's Eric, waving his flashlight so I can see him. I'll never forget that night. That was the first night I realized I wasn't just patrolling for homeless, trespassers, or maintenance issues. That night is the night that changed my life and solidified my belief in the paranormal. For the record, I'm not really into ghost stuff. I don't believe in spirits, demons, or any of that. But I do work in a hospital. And if you listen to the cleaning staff, the place is, allegedly, full of ghosts. Supposedly, the basement is the worst spot. Everyone says that's where they see and hear the most. One lady who works the night shift, and was fired a few months back, swore a shadow used to follow her around whenever she was down there alone. I always thought she was exaggerating or just trying to freak us out. Earlier this week, I had to go down to the basement to grab some linen from the laundry room. It wasn't exactly my favorite errand. The basement already gives off weird vibes. It's dim, echoes strangely, and honestly feels a few degrees colder than the rest of the hospital. But whatever, it's not like I haven't done it hundreds of times. So I get to the laundry room door, and it's one of those that requires a passcode to unlock. As I'm punching the code in, I hear this voice. A girl's voice. It wasn't loud, more like a soft conversation a few feet away. At first, I thought it was the manager from Environmental Services. She uses the hospital's voice chat radios constantly, so maybe someone had left one nearby. I even paused and glanced around expecting to see her, but the hallway was completely empty. I figured maybe she'd just stepped away or gone into another room, and didn't dwell on the matter further. But when I opened the door to the laundry room, the voice cut off immediately. Then I swear I heard faint footsteps, like someone moving towards the back of the room. I stepped inside, calling out a casual, "Hello," thinking maybe someone was in there restocking or something, but I got no answer. I walked to the back of the room and there was nobody. The room was empty completely. Here's the part that made my stomach drop a little. There are only two ways out of the room: the main door I came in through, and a back door. But to get out the back, you have to walk over this heavy metal weight station that's bolted to the floor. It's loud as hell, clangs every time someone steps on it, and I didn't hear a thing like that, not even a creak. There's no way someone went out of their way without me hearing it. And I know no one passed me in the main door either. I was standing in it. So what the hell did I hear? I'm not saying it was a ghost, it probably wasn't. Maybe the voice was some weird radio feedback, or maybe I imagined the footsteps. But still, it was strange. I've done that errand countless times and never experienced anything like that. Just thought I'd share in case anyone had something similar happen to them in a hospital. I mean, these places are creepy enough even without the ghost stories. The abandoned hospital had become our unofficial clubhouse that summer. The place had been shut down for years, and while most people in town avoided it, my friends and I treated it like our own weird hangout spot. We'd head there after school, on weekends, during holidays, any excuse really. It wasn't safe, and it definitely wasn't smart. But when you're a bored teenager in a small town, an empty, decaying hospital feels like the closest thing to adventure you're gonna get. So that morning, with no school and nothing else going on, I figured everyone was already there. It was sunny and warm, and we talked the night before about meeting up and working on our room, the one we'd furnished with a few salvageable chairs and a metal table. We kept adding little things wherever we found them, the way you'd decorate a treehouse. When I walked to the grounds, I saw one of the guys ahead of me, heading around the back towards the basement. That was our usual way in, a tiny window near the ceiling you had to wiggle through, dropping straight into a damp, cluttered basement full of rusted equipment. No matter how many times I crawled through it, the place always creeped me out. The whole hospital did, but in a way that was the charm. We'd even camped there once, all of us sleeping in sleeping bags inside an old patient room. The heavy hospital door still had a little square viewing window like the one in psych wards, and at night we kept spooking ourselves thinking someone was walking past it. Probably just shadows. But when you're lying in the dark in an abandoned hospital, your brain fills in the rest. I slipped through the basement window again and made my way towards the stairs. The air down there was always cold and stale, like nothing had moved in decades. I wasn't really paying attention. I could hear one of the guys ahead of me, footsteps echoing just enough to guide me. We had a room on the 3rd floor that we'd claimed as our hideout, so I started climbing. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I could see figures up ahead. I assumed it was my friend and didn't give it a second thought. I pulled out my phone to check the time and noticed I'd gotten a text I'd forgotten about. Earlier that morning, I'd asked them where they were. Their reply came in, "We're at the skate park." I froze completely. If they were all at the skate park, who had I been following for the last 10 minutes? It was like my senses snapped into place all at once. I felt watched, like hundreds of unseen eyes were fixed on me. Every sound in the long, empty hallway became sharper and closer. and then it hit me. The person ahead of me was gone. There were no footsteps, no movement, no silhouette, nothing. I was 3 floors deep, in a building that terrified me, even though I wasn't alone. And the only way out was back the way I came, through the basement. The fear hit me like knives, fast and everywhere at once. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the stairs or the basement, or crawling out the window. My memory jumps from the moment of realization straight to me running outside, breathless and shaking. What sticks with me is how normal it felt to follow someone into the building, how I didn't question it until the moment I was completely alone, how they disappeared the second I reached the deepest part of the hospital. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe the atmosphere messed with me, or maybe I really did follow someone who wasn't there at all. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of haunted hospital stories. One of my favorite topics, actually. I find the stories truly chilling, and I hope you did as well. If you would like some extra free bonus content, feel free to go check it out, link in the description. I'd like to extend a huge final thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Their help goes incredibly far in helping me run this channel, so thank you all. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I will see you on Friday for another collection of scary stories.